Testing, testing.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today is Monday, November 16th, 2020. I would like to call to order this special board meeting. Special board meeting, which is a distance learning update. I want to thank everyone who was on the Zoom tonight. I want to thank everyone who was watching us via YouTube. Thank you for you joining us tonight. Goes without saying, famous disclosure, hopefully we avoid technical difficulties tonight. We've been doing good, so hopefully that stays with us tonight. So I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I'd like to begin with the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Hurst to give us his presentation or his update tonight.
Good evening, Board of Directors. Thank you for the opportunity to just have the special board meeting. We have our executive team members here as well, and we have a presentation to share with you. We did share with you ahead of time, also uploaded it to the agenda. And basically what we want to do is just share our current reality with the high COVID rate, how that is impacting our staffing. I think somebody else has their mic on.
That need to stay away from people. Everybody knows
I have to stop my.
Sorry, Mike, we were trying to mute some other individuals who was causing some background, so we had to deal with that. But as I was sharing, we have a presentation that we're going to be sharing from our teaching and learning team that just shares our current reality and how it's impacting staff. There's also a letter of support that we received from the Othello Administrative Association, and I will address that after. Keep having people come on. So if those who are on, if we could just have you mute your mics. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And with that, Pete, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then however you want to orchestrate the questions, certainly that's up to you. And then I'll come back and talk about the letter of support.
All right, thank you. While Thalia gets the presentation ready, I guess the style for the conversation this evening would be just that it's a conversation between the district administration and the board. So at any point during the presentation, we would be prepared for questions or comments or clarifications. Certainly, whatever time we need at the end as well would be available for that. So Thalia, if you could just jump into slide 1. So I just want to make sure that we're all really clear on the purpose this evening. It's to provide an update and a recommendation regarding our instructional model. This update is based on the uncontrolled level of COVID spread in our community and the impact that the quarantine protocols have had on school operations. It's very, very difficult to deliver high quality instruction when our system, when our staff and our students are not safe and healthy. And so it's important that we get together this evening to talk about that impact. Next slide, please, Lynn. So just outlining the outcomes for this evening, we do want to talk about some lessons learned. We've learned some really exciting things about our staff and about our students and about our families. There were some assumptions made early on about the operations of schools during the COVID experience. But what we have learned is our kids know how to wear masks and they will wear them. They're following those protocols. We know our kids can maintain social distance. We know that we have structures and reminders and strategies in place that allow them to be successful in maintaining social distance. We also really appreciate the partnership with our families as they complete the attestation forms, letting us know how their kids are feeling, being mindful of their family's health and the health of others when they send their kids to school. One of the other things that we want to acknowledge is that it's a significant challenge to contact trace. Department of Health in our area and across the country are struggling with that part, and they have given that responsibility to the school sites. We have several staff members that are dedicated daily to monitoring contact tracing, making sure we notify the folks who need to be notified. And we're excited by the system that we've put in place, but I think it's important that the board and the community know that it's a significant challenge on top of teaching and learning responsibilities that exist in the typical operations of schools. What we want to make sure that you all acknowledge is that when we have a high rate in the community, a high rate of spread, we should expect some of our students and staff to test positive or to be exposed and have to quarantine. So it shouldn't be a surprise that when the levels are up in our community that we would have a similar experience with our students and staff. And what's happening now, what we've realized is that when staff are quarantined, that causes significant operational issues. So to provide some context for the board and the community related to numbers, as of 3 p.m. today, we had about 47 total staff out due to quarantine. And those 47 folks were quarantined for close contact, symptoms, or positive COVID tests. It was the whole range of why folks might be asked to quarantine by the Department of Health or their employer. It's spread across all categories. We have 4 administrators in quarantine. We have 15 teachers in quarantine. 9 of those 15 are at the elementary schools. And we also have 28 classified staff members in quarantine. Many more are pending the results of their COVID tests. Today, we also had to quarantine a cohort of students at Scrutiny Springs. There were 2 positives in that student group, and Department of Health regulations require that we shut that cohort down. There also happens to be other students who are showing symptoms in that cohort. We have a total of 9 students that have tested positive, 8 of them at the elementary school and 1 at Othello High School. We have about 225 staff working on site in our elementary schools as of now. And so when you do the simple math, there are about just over 20% of our staff are out due to the requirements of quarantining or they're ill. Many of our staff members who are out are too sick to work from home. So that leaves us in quite a challenge in finding subs for those folks who are out. We've done an excellent job over the last couple of years of increasing our sub pool. Certainly has been an impact on that, dealing with the folks who are forced to quarantine. That's our current reality. What we'd like to remind the board about in the next slide, Thalia, is your request in September, October for us to consider accelerating our move towards a less restrictive model. So we took that directive, we got to work and we put the plan in place. And we committed, when we submitted that plan to the board and we shared the operational impact, that we would be evaluating the impact on the system. How are we doing with that new model? Current reality tells us that the accelerated transition to a less restrictive model, it needs to be slowed down. And that's really the gist of the conversation this evening. There are two primary reasons that we're recommending a slowdown in the implementation of a move to our less restrictive models. One reason, the primary reason, is that OSPI directs us to work in collaboration with the Department of Health. Certainly the Department of Health in Adams and Grant County monitors what's happening in communities, and in Othello in particular. They monitor the rate of spread, and they reached out to us and they asked us to really consider our plan. We submitted that plan to Department of Health for feedback. They have been great partners all along. They have been very clear about identifying the reopening of schools as an experiment. This hasn't been done before in our country and in our community. And so we're all trying things out. And we know that when we're running these experiments that we adjust based on our experience. And what our experience tells us now is we need to slow things down. That's certainly what Department of Health is recommending. They asked us to look at our plan, think about the timing, the dates, and the groups. And those recommendations that we collaborated with Department of Health around are going to be reflected in the slides that you see at the end of the presentation today. The other primary reason that we're suggesting a slowdown ties completely to operations. The staffing shortage that I identified just a few moments ago due to positive cases or close contact and quarantine protocols, it means we just don't have enough folks to run the schools. We don't have people to keep our schools open and running efficiently. And I think it's not fair to share with the community that being face-to-face or in person is a better model than what we were delivering in a distance learning model, when the model we're delivering face-to-face isn't what it needs to be. And right now it isn't what it needs to be because we don't have the folks there to deliver the instruction. The next slide is a reminder for the board about our move to the accelerated model. We did that at a critical point for learning and public health. Certainly the board pushed that initiative and asked us to consider it. As numbers were coming down, we made that transition. It was phased, it was strategic, and it was responsive. And right now we're at another critical point in our community for learning and public health, and we are required to respond. And right now the model tells us to adjust our accelerated timeline. This transition and all transitions moving forward should be based on data and not dates. We're going to provide dates as targets to support planning, but the system requires an agreed upon set of metrics to provide consistency for students, their families, and our staff. And we're going to talk with you about those metrics that we're requesting this evening.
So I'd like to take a moment and share with you some of the past incident rate data that we've had and where we are now. So this graph tracks Adams County's incident rates per 100,000 from October 21st to November 14th. If we look back at October 26th, the district had received final approval from the board to move forward with our in-person blended learning instruction, starting with our K-3 students. At that time, the incident rate was 134, and it had been around that number, dipping up and down just a little bit, but in the 100s incident rate. Then on November 4th, when we actually started the in-person instruction, the incident rate had bumped up to 347. Today, we're here because the incident rate has skyrocketed to 957. As you can see in this line graph, the numbers can go up or down in just a matter of days, but the overall trend line right now is certainly on the rise. One thing that I do want to emphasize is we do not believe that this rise was due to bringing students back to our campus. What we do recognize, though, is that because of the rise in the community at large, it has an impact on our district with some of the things that Pete has just shared around the number of staff that need to be out because of quarantine. Next slide, Leah. So this graph breaks it out where the line graph was Adams County. This breaks it down by incident rates within school district boundaries. And so as you can see, clearly the hot spot right now is within our school district boundaries. The incident rate over the past 14 days is 1,091. It's never been higher. It's at its highest point right now. Next slide, Leah. So that's where we're at. And that's our current reality. That's what brings us here today. A significant challenge that we're facing now is to know when to transition from one instructional model to another. What's needed is a defined metrics to determine when we need to transition. We believe that having a metrics would provide one, clear expectations from the board to the district without having to call emergency or special board meetings. It's also an opportunity to rally as a community, because if we know the numbers, we know where our rate is and where we want to be, that we can rely on each other to and support one another in doing our part with social distancing and wearing of masks and other precautions so that we can bring the incident rate down, because we all want to bring our students back. Another benefit is to give our staff members, our students, our parents, our community time to prepare for these instructional transitions. When rates are trending down and we see that pattern, we can begin preparing for in-person instruction. On the flip side, if we see rates that are trending up, then we know that we need to prepare for that transition back to distance learning. As Pete mentioned earlier, it's the idea of using data rather than setting calendar dates for our transitions, and to get ourselves prepared for when we do need to shift. The numbers that you have here, the 0 to 75 with a traditional model, 75 to 200 in a blended instruction, and 200 plus in a distance learning. This is the recommendation that we have as the district for when those guidelines should be, but certainly would be open to conversation and recommendations from the board. But we do really hope that we can land on a metrics to help guide us as we move forward.
This slide provides a reminder for the board and the community of where we were. The accelerated blended reopening start dates, those are indicated in the upper half of the image. The rationale for why we selected those dates and the models that we were recommending. As you may recall, when we submitted that recommendation to the board, there were gaps built in to support the evaluation of the instructional model. It would give the system an opportunity to determine impact and plan next steps. Much like a budget, these were provided as best case scenarios, options for us to consider with gaps built in for reevaluation. What we are recommending, the transitions and dates in the bottom half of the image they are pending a downturn in the rate of community spread. The data that John just shared previously, getting agreement across the system on appropriate metrics for our system to make informed decisions and to plan properly is an important factor for us to consider before we commit to any sort of dates. I do want to let our staff know and our families out there who are impacted by changes in these start dates that special education students should expect to continue as is, specifically our life skills and self-contained classrooms. We would continue to operate the way we have since the summertime, really. What we're suggesting now and recommending strongly is that K-12 would move to a distance learning model beginning. The last day for in-person instruction would be tomorrow. It would give our K-3 students an opportunity to transition, to get their resources and materials that may be at the school site and prepare for a move to distance learning on Wednesday. All staff and students K-3 could have a potential return to in-person instruction on November 30th after the Thanksgiving break, if the metrics indicate that it's appropriate. We are also recommending that we push back the 4-6 start date into January. That was done in collaboration with the Department of Health, whose expectation is that the Thanksgiving holiday and into Christmas, significant downturn in the rate of spread in our community is unlikely if folks don't cooperate. So as those numbers continue to rise or stabilize at the elevated levels that they are now, we'll have to reevaluate in January those opening dates. It's also important that we let folks know and the board that we would require all staff to be on site beginning 11:30 after the Thanksgiving break, because we want to continue to provide small group instruction as best we can for students that are struggling. We're coming to the end of the semester for our secondary students, and it's important that we're able to provide opportunities for them to close some of those learning gaps and to make sure that the credits that they need to reach high school graduation or to make progress towards high school graduation, that we give them every opportunity we can in this model. So we would be having folks on site beginning 11:30. That's really the long and short of it. That's what we're recommending. And so I turn it back over to Dr. Hurst.
So before we turn it over to the board for discussion and questions, I wanted Talia to bring up the letter of support. And what I would like to do is just go through the letter of support. It's from our Othello Administrators Association, which is comprised of our certificated directors, our principals, which we have 7 of, and our assistant principals, which we have 7 of as well. And this was a letter that was sent to our board of directors, and it was simply, really it's a reiteration of what Pete and John just shared and their support of the plan that was just shared and the metrics that was just shared as well. Some of the key items that I'll point out is the second sentence where it says, as school leaders, we applaud and echo the board's desires to see students back in school. So just sharing with you, this is from our school leaders. And I will echo as well, as the superintendent, it's been very exciting to see our students back in schools, going around to the schools, and our teachers have been excited as well. But what you also see and what you heard from Pete and John is an acknowledgement from our administrators and our leaders that community spread of COVID has increased over the past several weeks, as was shared with John. In this letter, at the time it was written, it had the incidence rate was about 700 per 100,000. John had mentioned that they're at the highest point, and really as of today, John had mentioned a number, but they're actually right close to 1,200 per 100,000. So that was just new information to share. Another component in here of their support, they did share the metric, the same metric that Pete just went over, but they also shared that what's happening because of the high COVID rates is staff is being affected, or our staffing is being affected because of the positive tests or the close contacts, or they're showing symptoms as well, and the necessity to quarantine. And really, they reiterated as well, all of our leaders, the ability to really effectively and efficiently perform in-person instruction due to the lack of substitutes being available. So I wanted to make sure that I just shared that. This letter went to the board of directors, but I wanted to make sure that the public was aware of the letter of support from all of our leaders as well. And again, I wanted to reiterate what both John and Pete both shared, that this is a recommendation. And as I share with board members, either individually or through email, that we're looking for feedback from the board. We're looking for an approval as presented, or feedback or a modification. So at this time, I'm just going to open it up for questions from the board, and then we'll try our best to answer your questions.
When a teacher has been exposed and they have to quarantine, how long do they have to quarantine? And if they get negative test results, how quickly can they come back to school?
I can
We're going to let Sandra answer all the questions related to. Sandra, are you able to answer those questions?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Lindsay, if a teacher is exposed to a COVID positive individual, they have to quarantine for 14 days from the date of their last exposure, and a negative test result does not bring that individual back sooner for the 14 days.
Is that just specific to our district, or is that standard? Is that standard procedure? Because I have heard from other districts that if you get a negative test and after a certain amount of days, you're able to go back to work.
I'm not
Because-
sure what other districts are doing. I know that this COVID protocol chart came from Dr. Brzezinski.
Okay.
How about if somebody tests positive and is not showing any signs or symptoms?
If somebody tests positive with no symptoms, we tried to find them remote work. So they would still not be allowed to come on site. They would have to quarantine, and then they would hopefully have some remote work that we are able to assign to them.
Okay.
I assume that's for the 14 days still? From the date of the COVID test?
COVID positive is a 10-day quarantine.
Okay. So even if they're asymptomatic, just to clarify from Ken's questions, even if they're asymptomatic and they test positive, they have 10 days of quarantine,
Correct.
not on campus. Okay.
Correct.
I had some questions about, Pete shared with how many of staff are positive or are quarantining, and that's 20%. I had concerns about the bus division and food services. How many do you have the numbers of how many are positive currently in those two departments? Because I mean, if bus drivers were to get it, then we would still have problems with getting kids to campus, even if we had the teachers. And so I guess I just wanted to know if, I mean, there's so many different factors. If we didn't have janitors as well, or those kinds of things, then at what other departments are, all of the departments are essential, but what other groups make it so that it doesn't matter about the teaching staff?
Sure. All those departments that you mentioned, Jen, are currently being impacted with quarantine individuals or COVID positive. So we do have a couple in food service. We have custodial out. We have maintenance out. We have warehouse out. And then we have a couple in transportation that are not positive, but they're in quarantine.
So every department across everyone is affected somewhat. Some have higher percentages than others, is what you're saying.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Sandra, I was wondering, so out of those that are quarantining, and some of them have no positive, they're just quarantining because of the 14-day, do we have to get subs for them, or can they do that from home on?
Thank you for all the. And if we wanted to, we probably wouldn't have enough subs to go around anyway. So if those individuals are able to perform their job duties remotely, they can do that. We encourage that. If they cannot, then
Sandra, if you're talking, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I think we lost Sandra a bit there, but I do want to provide a comment around the substitute issue. Certainly, we appreciate every sub that we have. We know how hard they work, and that is a challenging task for them to move from classroom to classroom in any setting, let alone this experience. What I hope the board considers is that the push all along had been, our kids need to be back in schools because it's better instruction. What I think is important is not only that we talk about sort of the operational impacts and how can we find folks and how can we fill gaps. Again, this is not a comment on the quality of our subs, but it is a comment on the quality of our teachers. Those that are well-trained, that understand our systems, that understand our protocols. And when they're not in the classroom, if they can do it remotely, I guess as educational leaders, we would think that that's a better experience than having a substitute who they may not be familiar with, a substitute who doesn't have all the information on each of those students. So when we think about the quality of the experience for the student, I think it's important that you remember that, and that you remember that that was your challenge to us, that we need to provide the best experience possible instructionally for our kids.
You know, I'm looking at the chart that the health department gave to us. And this says if you test positive, you should quarantine for 10 days from symptom onset and 24 hours after a fever resolves itself and your symptoms have improved. So this says 10 days if you test positive. And if you test negative, it should be 24 hours. You should isolate for 24 hours. So I'm wondering why even an exposure with a negative test result is still making us quarantine for 14 days when the health department only requires a 10-day quarantine when you test positive.
Sandra may be having some internet issues, but my understanding of that comment is that the reason that the negative test doesn't exclude you from the quarantine is that their understanding of the virus spread is that anytime in that 14-day window, you could become positive. So there's no way to know when, if we can identify when you were exposed and you test negative 3 days after that, that doesn't mean in the ensuing 11 days that you could test positive. So that's why folks are required to quarantine for the 14 days, even if they have a negative test. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? I apologize for the internet. Lindsay, you might be looking at, there's different pathways on the charts. If you don't one and you test negative, you can go back to work. If you
cut out, I didn't
quarantine for 14 days, even.
Will you hold on, Sandra? Will you repeat that? Your internet cut out and I didn't hear you, and I'm very interested in this information. So will you say that one more time?
You might be looking different pathways on the chart. So if you are not exposed to a COVID positive individual and you had the sniff, you can certainly come back to work. You don't have to quarantine for the 14 days. It's only if you're exposed to a COVID positive where you have to quarantine regardless for the 14 days.
Okay, so even if you're showing no symptoms, I guess I'm just reading this health department thing incorrectly. From what I see, it says, do you have symptoms? Yes or no. If you go to no, and you test and you take a negative test result, then it says isolate for 24 hours, but maybe I'm reading this wrong.
Okay, we can certainly review that, Lindsay, if you would like. Definitely confusing.
Yeah, it could definitely be on my end, where I'm misunderstanding. I'm just wondering if there is anything that can be done about just the 14-day exposure quarantine. Just seems, even with negative test results, it seems like a lot, because I mean, at that rate, a teacher could be exposed the day they come back to work and then be out for 14 more days and 14 more days and 14 more days. Like, it just seems like if you get a negative test result, that should count for something. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if that's even in control of our district, or if that's strictly the health department's call. I don't know. I'm just reading this health department thing that they sent in, and it's saying 10 days after a positive test result is the only amount you have to quarantine.
Yeah, I can tell you that we've been working really closely with the Department of Health. We're pretty confident in the measures that we're taking and the quarantining process that we're using. We're on the phone daily with Karen Potts. They're providing great support. So I'm really confident in the quarantining processes that we're using.
Okay.
Lindsay, I think the part where I think Sandra has been cut out, I mean, her internet has cut out. That is the key part, is if you've been exposed to someone that's COVID positive, what you're looking at might just apply to symptoms, not if you've been exposed to someone that's COVID positive. So she's talking about if that even if you've gotten a negative test, and so I think that that's where the confusion lies. And Sandra, if you can email that to Talia, if you have access to that chart or whatever you're talking about, so that it could be on the screen, I think that that might be make things a little bit more clear. So I think that that's where the difference lies in, do you have symptoms, yes or no, as opposed to if you've been exposed to someone that is COVID positive. Just a thought.
Okay. Yeah, I guess this does say, like, if you've been exposed and you have no symptoms, I don't know. Potato. My question was if there was anything that we could do about that, because it just seems like a lot if they have a negative test result. But as far as where I stand with this, science is showing that schools are not super spreaders. And when we are making children pay the consequences for adults' decisions, I have a big problem with that. And if every teacher in our district could answer honestly that they've not been out to eat, that they've not been to Walmart, that they have not been to Moses Lake or Tri-Cities or anywhere outside of Othello, and they are strictly quarantining to their homes and they're only catching COVID at school, then I would say we shouldn't be in school. But I would say the overwhelming majority of teachers who are sick right now would be sick whether they went to school and taught kids in school or they taught them online, because they're not catching it from school in the overwhelming majority of cases. And so I have big problems with forcing kids out of school, because we have adults who are being exposed or choosing to expose themselves, or whatever the case is. Maybe they're not wearing a mask, or they're going somewhere where people aren't wearing a mask, or they're going out to dinner, or I don't know. They're not getting it from school. So the teachers who are getting it are going to get it regardless, because they're not getting it from their students. So I have a problem making kids pay the consequences for adult decisions.
You know, early in the presentation, I believe I heard Pete say that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, but most of the spread that we've had has been community spread, and it's not really spreading in the district. That was my understanding.
All of our indications are that we're not having the protocols that are in place in schools have been successful. What I think is important and that we should acknowledge is that schools do not operate independent of the community, particularly in a community like Othello. They're an important part of a small community, and there are lots of interactions that occur in our communities in other areas that do come to the schools. So just like we say we can protect kids at school and we think we can keep them safe and we're not spreading it, it doesn't mean that it's not going to come there. And it doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. And I also, I want to go back to a conversation we had many, many months ago, and a bit of a challenge for the teachers, to say for the teachers, they figured out some really important lessons around distance learning. And to, I think, to present to the community that model isn't much better than it was. And then it's not, when you balance public health and learning opportunities for kids, that it couldn't be an effective model for us. So I think to indicate to folks that it's some sort of consequence or almost a punishment as it's been framed is not accurate, and it's not fair for teachers, and it's not fair for kids, and it doesn't instill confidence in our community when we're trying to do the best we can to balance public health and instruction.
Okay. Well, like I said, we put a lot of protocols in place to help protect everybody. as you know, the governor spoke, and he did not change anything for K-12 instruction. And one of his, I won't say reasons, but one of his statements was that by kids being in school also helps mitigate the COVID spread. And I really believe that. And from what I got from this presentation was that you actually want to send K through 3 back to online instruction. Is that correct? Until the 30th?
Correct. That's based on Department of Health recommendation.
Okay. Because of high community spread at this moment.
Yeah, and I think the rationale behind that piece of the presentation and your comment about Governor Inslee's commentary on the level of spread in K-12 education, what the state has also afforded us is local control. And I guess I challenge the board to provide examples of districts with the rate of spread that we have that are still open. So I don't think the governor's going to say, hey, you should close schools when the rates are 200 or 250 like they are in much of the state. But when they are at such an elevated level and our local health experts and our local educational leaders are saying close, it seems inconsistent to not consider it strongly.
I'm against moving us backwards though, for the K through 3. When we're moving them backwards, they can't ever catch up after we've had them in class. If we are doing our best at safety and cleaning, then this should be a good measure. And from what I've seen, just a little bit I've seen, I haven't seen kids that have their masks down. They seem obedient about keeping themselves distanced, walking to and from out of schools, getting out. In school, I saw classes walking down a hallway. Their masks were in place. They're doing a really good job, and we're like making them go backwards.
Yeah, I think from an instructional perspective on your comments, we certainly don't feel like we're making them go backwards. We are saying that we're going to switch back to a model that we think is appropriate based on the public health crisis that we're dealing with. I would also challenge the statement that kids can never catch up, because there's evidence all across our system every year, not just this year, where kids close gaps, where teachers close gaps. And so to make a statement like that says it's certainly going to impact our students, there's no denying that. But I am fully confident in our teachers, and I'm fully confident in our kids and our parents, because we've seen them step up. Our online delivery model is much better than it was, and it will continue to improve. And if the numbers say we should be closed and it's the prudent thing to do, then we should consider it. And I don't think there's some voice on the other side saying that we're trying to scare or intimidate people not to come back. And I've heard statements like that from some of the board members. So I don't think it's fair for you all to scare families and say, your kids are never going to get caught up, because that's just not true.
With the, I believe we just kind of hit the midterm in the first semester. Have we got any data and all the grade levels that are doing online yet on how they are doing? Is there any data available to show their progress and how online is working with them?
Yeah, much of our data in the spring was certainly delayed because we didn't have the students on campus to assess them. We certainly have platforms where we could capture that information remotely, but it's difficult comparing those two experiences for kids. I don't think any educator in our community or any other community wouldn't say that gaps have increased during this time. That's certainly accurate, and I think a reasonable assumption. What we have to determine is how quickly can we close these gaps? How can we make the gaps slow in a distance learning model? Nobody in the room tonight is advocating that a distance learning model is superior to an in-person experience. But we're not, what we're presenting to the community as in the current in-person experience isn't what kids had before. It might make you all feel good to say that we're back in schools, but it's not the same experience. And what we're struggling with and what we're hearing from our principals and our associations is that when we are operating in this model, there's confusion, the going back and forth, the uncertainty, a little bit of fear that exists in the schools. It's not the same experience as a traditional school year. There are some kids there. Whether or not you all can indicate to us that it's a better model than what we were doing through distance learning, I guess I'd ask the same of you. What data do you have that indicates that it is a better model? Because the experts in the system are telling you that it's not.
Okay, I'd like to make just a few comments here as part of my interaction. Our present reality is not one that any of us like, and I think it's safe to it's safe to say that we're all worried about 1,200 per 100,000 case rate. I think for the most part, we can all agree that we would rather it be in person. I think we can agree with the comment that we have, the district's done a tremendous job to where we're not seen as super spreaders. I'll agree with that comment, I think, or I know. But at the same time, it's tough to not give the strong consideration to this recommendation. And this is one board member that's speaking. I think if we take a macro view at this, what I'm struggling with is even the potential 11:30 start date. It is my understanding, as the presentation has been laid out, that we want to go to a defined metric, and that my hesitancy is that metric tonight. For one, if we say that anything over 200, we will not be in any type of blended model. My fear is we may not the rest of the year. We don't know that. My hope is that we would, but as far as the delay or the pause right now, I don't know, Chris, who would know this. When are we? Is it Tuesday the 24th that we're done, and then it's Thanksgiving break?
The first day of the break is the 25th, Mike.
Okay, so in theory, if we did go with this pause, it is 5 in-person days that we are discussing here. If we decided to go with the pause, because it'd be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Monday and Tuesday, and then we're off for those 5 days. I just don't know if, I think after Thanksgiving, if we came back the 30th, again, the up and down, the uncertainty, the kids will be in school for a week, and then we're going to get numbers perhaps even higher than 1,200, unfortunately. Because I don't know that a lot of people are going to do a virtual Thanksgiving, to be honest. So I'm hesitant with the restart number. I am fearful of a metric that is going to prohibit us from, I don't know, 300 being a number where perhaps doable, but because we've set the metric, we can't go to it. So I'm not comfortable, for one, and as I've thought about all these things, I'm not comfortable with where the case rate is today to continue. But there's a part of me that this break or this pause, the length of it is if we say yes to the pause tonight, it may be undetermined, and that's where I'm struggling with as of right now.
I have to agree with you on that matrix too, Mike. I think a number at this time, it could be defeat what we went down the road later, possibly. I understand the purpose for it and where the district would like to have it, so they don't have to come to us all the time to find out when we progress. But you know what? I think the board needs a say in that too once in a while, because the state did leave it back to the local health district and the school boards. As for the K3, I believe they need to continue. Like you said, it's 5 days till the Thanksgiving break. The 4 through 6 were scheduled to come in on November 30th, I believe. You know what? I don't mind putting that off for a few days and having a target date and the board meeting on another special meeting on the 30th. So we could take a look at, that's 2 weeks. So we could retake a look and re-examine these numbers in the COVID counts that we currently have. If it's still staying up there high and we're still seeing a lot of community spread, I would like to take a serious look at it. Then to maybe pause 4 through 6 if we need to. I think there's enough time there that we could do it.
I'm concerned about the roller coaster of highs and lows. Every time it goes high, are we going to go back to all online? Or then if it goes low, then we go back to in school, in person? That would probably be a real detriment for these teachers also, trying to figure out how to teach them, and the kids' confusion.
A detriment also, guys, that we need to keep at the forefront of this is, like Pete has mentioned, have the institution, the facility open without the personnel to do the in-person learning. What then? And if we're what we're wanting is a better quality instruction, we've been challenged to provide proof of either or. And if we don't have the people there to do optimal in person, again, not a knock on any substitute or anything like that, but just the camaraderie, the teacher-student relationship that exists. It's a tough situation. I don't know that there is a silver bullet answer. It is a situation that nobody's ever gone through. So, we have a chart on our screen here that was made because of what's going on. And this chart isn't fail-proof. But I do not feel comfortable with where our case rate is now, that something doesn't change.
I want to just go back to Pete's point for a second when he was talking about fear in the community. A 3rd grade classroom at Scootney Springs had a student test positive for COVID. The teacher sent a note home to the parents letting them know that someone else in the class tested positive and that if they didn't feel comfortable to keep their kids home. He had 100% attendance the next day. 100% of his students came in. So that for me sends a very clear message about how parents are feeling. If he even had 20% of his students gone, that would send a message to me saying, okay, parents are not comfortable with this. But with 100% attendance, parents are not that fearful, or they wouldn't send their kids to school. I also found it interesting that the people who contacted me before this meeting begging to stay in school were educators between the grades of K through 3. And the people who emailed and asked not to go back, the overwhelming majority were higher education teachers above 5th grade. So the teachers, the professionals that are in this right now, they're in the trenches putting the work in. They're the ones saying, please don't take our students back to online learning. I'm the only person on the board who has a child in 1st grade, unless Sharon has a child I don't know about. But I'm the only one that I know of that has a child in 1st grade. So I by no means say that I am a professional. Her teacher is amazing. I know her both personally and professionally, and she's top notch. I'm here to tell you that my 1st graders' education online is not working. And it is no fault to the teacher, and she's great, and the principal's great, and I am not bagging on any one person. I'm saying my personal experience with 1st grade online Zoom is just not ideal. It's just not. So if we have to push back the older kids, that's one thing. But I'm here to advocate for these 5 and 6 and 7-year-old kids, 8-year-old kids, to say this doesn't work for them, and for their parents, and for their teachers. Their teachers are the ones saying, please don't do this. So that's who I'm here to advocate for. And I'm not saying that anybody here is the bad guy or the good guy, and there's not a winning side and a losing side. I'm advocating for these kids who need to be with their teacher. And I understand that 3 hours a day is not a typical school day, but it's something. And a kindergarten teacher sent me a message and said, my kids have made more progress since they've been in school than the 2 months of online learning they did before they stepped foot in my classroom. That means something to me.
I think it's important that you share your perspective and that we all recognize that that is your responsibility as a board member. But I think it's also important that we all acknowledge that our responsibility is as leaders is to represent the entire organization. So I'm encouraged that teachers want to be back in classrooms. I hear from those folks as well. But I also hear from folks who say, we shouldn't be back. We shouldn't be doing this. So then it's up to us. And I think it's actually your responsibility as a board. I think it's GP2 is that you'll act with a collective sense of responsibility. You'll work in partnership with the superintendent, with the administration, with students, with staff and parents. You don't just get to pick the one piece you want to listen to. It's important that we listen to all stakeholders. And the piece about fear that I was addressing was not that people are fearful in coming to school. It's about sending a message to folks that when we do come back into a more traditional model, that we're not going to be able to close some of the gaps that have been created. I don't think it's fair to compel folks to come back if they think they're putting their health at risk because their kid's never going to catch up. That's just not true. The other piece about folks deciding to come back to that particular third grade classroom, which I'm glad that they have confidence in the protocols and they feel comfortable coming back. But there are approximately 10% of our students at Wahidas who today called in and said, we're not coming back. We need to go to LMS. We're looking for a distance learning model. So there are folks on all sides of this issue. It's just important that when we have those issues that are very complicated like this, we should listen to local health experts. We should listen to the people grinding out. It's not just the last opinion that we heard. And I think it's important that you're here advocating for those teachers. I'm here advocating for teachers as well. I'm here advocating for principals. I'm here advocating for students. And I hope you don't begrudge me that.
No,
so
I don't. That's why I said I know there's not like a good guy or a bad guy or you're right and I'm wrong. I'm pleading on one side of the case and you're on the other, and I don't begrudge you anything. I wouldn't expect or want anything less from you than exactly what you're doing. I hope you know that, Pete.
So I would like to say that every person on every side is correct and no one is wrong. We all have maybe differences of opinion and maybe that the vote right now is for 5 people to actually make the decision for our entire district as to where we go forward. But we're all correct with our views. I just want to say that. And I think that we've all kind of said that, but every one of our views is correct. I had a chance to go and talk to a whole grade band at a specific campus today and ask the question, for those new people that just got on, can you please mute? And it's a grade band that's currently on campus that has students in their classroom. And I just said, just tell me how it's going. Tell me what it was like before when you were online. Tell me what it was like now, what it's like now when you're in person. And they said both of them are really hard. Online was hard, in person is hard. There's just different challenges. It was really enlightening. And I think that they changed my perspective a little bit with some things. Hearing the realities of what they're truly having to go through. So because of that, and one of their big comments was the back and forth, the on campus one day and the not on campus the next day is really difficult because of our decisions. And I explained, I said, but if there was a quarantine, it would be the exact same thing. And they said, yeah, we get it, but it's people that are making this decision, not quarantine cases or COVID that's making this decision. And so because of that, I think the 5 more days of them on campus, understanding that there's difficulties with that we're already having a staffing problem and those kinds of things, I would be fine with K through 3 still staying on campus. And then I don't know if I'm ready to say November 30th, them come back, because we came back right after Halloween, and we can tell by contact tracing, that's where our numbers are as high as they are because of Halloween. Coming back right after Thanksgiving with those students being on campus again, we're going to have high numbers again. I don't know if that's the answer, to put them back then or to then start with the 200 number. It sounds like a reasonable number until you're talking to people and you're, I would have guessed that number myself. Now that we're in the middle of it and we have numbers as high as we are, I don't know. There's no magic special number. I can tell you I was comfortable with that number before this meeting and before talking to a whole bunch of staff that came out of the woodwork to find me today when I was on campus. I'm definitely not comfortable with putting 4 through 12 on campus right now with our current numbers. I know that for positive. Unless they're small groups. I think that small groups and SPED need to continue. And small groups could be either in person or could be by Zoom, depending upon the comfortability, that's not a word, depending on the teacher and the campus, what that staff member is most comfortable with. I still want small groups to be happening. I understand that there are at-risk students, but at-risk doesn't necessarily just mean with academics. I've had multiple emails and conversations about SEL issues and concerns with students. And I would say across our district, SEL is just as important as academics. That has been a focus of our district, and I've been proud to see that it's not just about academics this time, that some campuses have had principals email all the staff saying, your biggest focus right now is SEL. It's not the education of students, because we need to make sure that those students are still going to be here if we ever do get back on campus. So that's where I'd have to say I'm at this time.
Hey, Pete, do you care to, can I ask Pete a question, Chris? Or?
Go ahead.
You mentioned a school and about 10% saying we're not coming back, LMS. Wasn't there like an opt-out date or deadline? Or are we still able to accommodate those folks? There
is an opt-out date that we ask folks to commit to say, we don't want students bouncing back and forth. We don't want that experience. I think what we're trying to be fair with parents about is when we ask them to make that commitment, the numbers in our community were very, very different. So if we can accommodate it and folks say, I don't feel safe coming back, then we're going to encourage our principals to think about that and communicate with those families. So I think we ask those folks to commit to a certain learning model at a time when the numbers were very different. And so we think it's only right that we listen to them if they advocate to go to a distance learning model.
Just to be clear, Pete, 10% of K through 3 students at Wahidas asked to switch to online?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but in conversations with the building administrators and someone from the central office who covered over there today, because we have a staffing shortage in the main office, that they were fielding phone calls throughout the day. So my quick math based on my conversation there is that we have about 200 students back, I think is what we have there now. And so it was in the neighborhood of 20 or 25 students who were deciding not to come back.
Okay.
Deciding or just calling to ask about?
My understanding is they said, hey, we're nervous about what's happening at the site. We understood that you all locked down. We're not coming back. That's my understanding.
And I know the communication was very well going out to all the parents of Wahitas that it was out of abundance of precaution that the site was closed down. It wasn't because of widespread. It was because of very, very minimal number of people. People had positive tested that were active in the school and around, that out of abundance of precaution, that's why it was closed down. No students or anything that I understand had COVID or anything there.
I have a question about small groups. My concern with shutting down and then only allowing small groups is equity amongst the schools. Does each school have a certain amount of students that are allowed on campus for small groups? Or is it, you know, Hiawatha is allowing 3 small groups, but Wahitas is bringing back 20 small groups? Or you insert the different school names. Is there equity amongst the schools in small groups? Because I don't think that it's fair for one school to have more small group opportunities than another. Can anyone answer that?
Yeah, and we're in agreement with you on the equity component. That was certainly a driving consideration for us in making the commitment in conversations with the Teachers Association that we were going to be requiring all staff to be on site beginning on the 30th. For exactly that reason, we didn't think it was appropriate to offer opportunities for some students if their teacher chose to be on campus, but exclude students from those opportunities if their teacher chose not to be on campus. But we also agreed with our association that the parameters around those small groups would be done within the guidance and the recommendations of the Department of Health. Also, each teacher would be responsible for providing small group instruction based on the current makeup of their class. If a teacher has a significant number of students that are struggling, they may in fact have more small groups than another teacher. But it will be driven by student data and student performance, not availability of staff.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Pete, I just want to clarify if I can, that small group idea, is that what you're proposing in the new MOU modifications, or that's what has already been agreed upon? Or can you just clarify that? I understand the concerns part, but can you clarify where we're at with the unions on that decision?
Yeah, the position of the district is that we've been able to do that all along. We've tried to accommodate as many employees as possible to make sure that if we had room, when we got into that agreement, certainly the governor had indicated that the telework was recommended and was the preferred model. That's not what we're hearing now. So the MOU, from our perspective, was drafted in such a way that it would allow us to compel folks to report to work. We have shared that with the association leadership, and certainly we continue to have collaborative conversations with them around that. But our perspective is that starting on 11/30, all teachers K-12 would be required to be on site to provide small group instruction in collaboration with their building administrators. Certainly if a teacher said, hey, I'm running small groups on these 2 or 3 days, but I believe I can work remotely successfully on this day, that's a conversation at the building level for them to have with their principal.
Thank you for clarifying. Thanks.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I just wanted to just share a few things with you.
Sure.
Certainly, I wanted to make sure that all of the board members got their questions answered. But wanted to just go back to the recommendation. So the district has put forth a recommendation. And I believe just protocol is for the board to consider that recommendation, and whether it passes or whether it fails, I think that needs to be addressed first, because I've heard several other conversations. One is the metric, and I've heard some concerns about the metric, but I think we have shared as well the importance of the metric, so that one, we're not going back and forth. And I heard Sharon mention that piece as well. And the other is to provide clear expectations from the board to the district, so that we don't have to come to a special board meeting and have these presentations, that is very clearly written, which is why we had shared the 200. And I think if the motion passes, it's a moot point. But if it doesn't pass, then we need to consider what will the metric be. And then I think the other question would be, I think the last slide would be the phased in approach. So that needs to be a conversation. But I think you need to address the recommendation first and then come back to a conversation about the metric and then the phased in approach.
Absolutely, Chris. I was just given ample time to get most of the discussion out of the way. Because based on what I'm hearing, this is going to be something that's going to have to be modified to some sort in some way, shape, or form. So on the presentation as presented, I need a motion for the acceptance of the recommendation from the district to pause online learning or in-person hybrid blended, tomorrow being the last day until restarting K3 on the 30th of November. This recommendation includes a metric of 200 per 100,000 being the rule, the standard to re-engage in blended or hybrid learning. And if it is accepted as proposed, there would be no need for a special meeting. If the numbers were higher, we know where we would stand. So to continue on tonight, I need a motion for the acceptance of the proposal from the district or the contrary.
I move that we vote on the proposal.
Okay. So there's been a motion made on approving the district proposal for the on in-person recommendation they've made tonight as presented. Is there a second to that? Jen, are you?
We just need to vote whether.
Are you for the proposal or against?
I am
let me make a
against
motion.
a part of the proposal. So what I think we need to vote on is, are we accepting it as is? And we just need to vote yes or no on that part and then move forward. That's what I'm proposing.
Let me make a motion. I motion that we accept the district's proposal as written. Can I get a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Therefore, Chris, the proposal is not accepted tonight. I think we can now open the conversation to expectations, to modifications that we would like to see made, ideas, I guess, next steps.
I would like to propose that we keep K3 on campus as they currently are. Are we ready to vote on that, yay or nay?
Yes.
I think, hold on, before we go there, I think it needs to be a little more broad than that, because otherwise we're going to have like 3 or 4 or 5 different proposals here. If we go just K3 and think that's the end all for tonight, then we still need to worry about the metric. Then we still need to worry about staffing and what happens if we don't have enough staff to continue even the K3. I mean, there's too many things that come to it. I think we can.
So my thought is
okay.
I think we need to do.
Maybe I interrupted you, Jen. Maybe I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
And I'm interrupting you. I know. I think that we need to do little parts at a time and say, yes, we're moving forward with this. Yes, we're moving forward with this. Or no, we're not accepting this part. This is where we're going with this. And I think that would be, that's where, instead of here's my proposal and oh, that one's going to fail. And here's my proposal on the whole gamut. Nope, that one's going to fail. Here's my proposal on the whole thing. So I think if we took out small chunks at a time and said, okay, this one, we're moving forward. This one, this part, nope, we're not here. We're going to change the number to this, or those kind. That's where I think
Okay,
I
then what
think
is,
that we're gonna have-
what is your motion?
I would like to move that we vote on keeping K3 on campus as it currently is.
Okay, there's been a motion made to keep K3 on campus. Are you disregarding the bottom portion of this slide, period, Jen? Are we not going to revisit it?
Nope, I'm just talking about the blue part of the bottom part of this slide. That's all I'm gonna, I think honestly, we would have 5 votes and we'd be all over the board. So I just want to talk about the K3 part right now with this first vote.
So yeah, I just want to be clear. You're talking about a vote to keep K3 in school as it is today till the 24th, and then revisit this on the 30th, or they come back again on the 30th like nothing happened.
I don't know. That I don't have the ending part there. I want to keep them on campus until if that's what I want to do. I want to keep K3 on campus until Thanksgiving, if I have to put a defining date right now.
Jen, what if we add to that? Because I agree. I agree that we need to keep K3 going. And I would like to see K3 going extended past November 30th. I have no problem putting 4 through 6 off for a little while. But also, I have no problem as a board member coming back at that first week of December and discussing where we currently are with our current COVID cases, how we are doing with our schools right now and staffing and stuff, to make a good solid decision moving forward from there. I think things could change between then and they could get worse. But I agree we need to keep K3 in. I agree. I have no problem meeting on the night of the 30th at another special board meeting. I know it's 1 week before. We're going to have another board meeting, I believe, in December 14th or something like that. But I have no problem putting 4 through 6 off. I don't like that January 11th date. And I know Pete said that we didn't want to hold it to dates, but I'm definitely not in favor of that metrics right now either, because that locks us into something that we may not like either. That may make it harder to get our kids back in the future. So that's why I'd like to revisit it in 2 weeks.
Okay, then I withdraw my motion. Does someone else have something else that they would like to
I would like,
make a motion?
I'm comfortable moving forward with K3 staying on campus indefinitely. And my number for when we pull them out is when the governor shuts us down. That's how I feel about K3. So,
Okay. There's been a motion made to keep K3 on campus indefinitely. Drop dead date would be a shutdown by the governor for K3. Is there a second to that motion?
I will second that.
Okay, so there's been a motion made to keep K3 on campus indefinitely unless there is a closure by the governor. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
I
Against? Aye. Okay, motion carries 3-1 with an abstention. I didn't hear a vote, Jen.
I'm sorry, I'm a nay.
Okay.
So
Motion carries 3-2. Chris, the directive for K3 is that they remain on campus indefinitely. Closure for them would be a governor mandated shutdown.
So just clarification, because I'm assuming when Lindsay said that she's not just talking about the governor, because typically that's going to come from OSPI or in collaboration with the State Department of Health. So I'm assuming that she probably means any of the above.
I mean, any of the above, unless we are shut down by the health department or OSPI or the governor, any sort of entity that forces a shutdown.
I was just going to mention the health department because they are also there too in this decision.
Okay, Chris, can I request and ask, as far as the other components of your presentation, are you needing a metric approved tonight? Are you needing the purple, the burgundy, and the teal there removed?
I
from
think
this
we absolutely need to speak about the rest of the chart. One, because there's communication that needs to happen, because right now, 4 through 6 is scheduled for November the 30th. So we would need to have a question and answer period like we did with the K through 3. However, again, we want to reiterate the district's ask. We don't have the staff to really support a quality in-person model, which is why we came to the board in the first place to ask for grace and to ask for consideration, pushing off everything else until January if the board's not going to go with the recommendation of the district. As was stated in talking with the Department of Health, we do know that the rates are going to continue to rise because of the holidays. People will gather. We just don't anticipate that the rates are going to go down. And I hear what Ken is saying, that let's come back on November the 30th and let's see where we are. That's too late for the district, just to be very honest with you. We can't meet on November the 30th and then anticipate on bringing 4 through 6 back. There's just not enough time for us to appropriately communicate. So I would like to consider the 4 through 6, 7 through 8, and 9 through 12.
And Chris, I have no problem putting 4 through 6 off for a few weeks. I'm just not agreeable on that January 11th date that's put down there right now. That's not a couple of weeks, that's a full month and a half down the road, actually almost 2 months down the road. I'm just not comfortable with that January 11th date. That's a long time for them to possibly be out.
Right.
That's why I have no problem putting it off 1 week, 2 weeks if necessary. But coming back as a board again with the district and rediscussing to where we are at to see if it would be to move forward with the progression of bringing 4 through 6 back. It may happen, it may not, but we will be closer to knowing a lot more 2 weeks down the road too.
Again, November 30th, just to keep in the back of our minds, if we waited 2 weeks past November 30th, that would give the kids 5 days back to school and then spring break.
Yeah, the winter
Or
break.
Christmas break.
The winter break.
So it is physically 6 weeks, but it's not 6 weeks of instruction.
Yes.
That's something we need to keep in mind.
Would we be ready to come up with a metric that doesn't apply to K3 but applies to the other grades of whether it be 200 per 100,000? Are we as a board comfortable with doing that? I know that Ken's talked about, let's just meet again, but that puts so many things up in the air for so many staff and so many leaders and so many things. Are we comfortable with coming up with a metric that applies to everyone else except for K3? I would be. Maybe I should start there.
May I just add one other component just for the board to consider? One, PK will have to come back in January just because of the portable issue. So just if we can eliminate that from the conversation. And then also just to remind the board, If it gets down to the point where we don't have the staffing, just understand that schools will be in a position where we have to close anyway. So that may happen as well. So just to let you know that piece.
Is there a
Question.
reason in January why the recommendation is not to come back January 4th like originally planned for the PK 4 through 6? Why
Yeah,
it pushed?
and Pete could jump in on this, but from our conversations, just looking at the holidays, Lindsay, when you look at Thanksgiving, you look at Christmas, and you look at the migration patterns also, whenever people go and travel, we're not sure what's going to happen, whether they're gathering, whether they're going to be, whether they bring something back. So starting back immediately doesn't allow a natural break where I guess you can self-quarantine those students. So starting on January 11th just allows that natural break or natural self-quarantining process instead of just jumping right back into the classroom. Because again, you have to remember that these families are celebrating regardless of what anyone has said. People may gather together with their families, and then we're expecting to come back on January the 4th and just putting them right back into the same situation to the classrooms. January the 11th just allows them to self-quarantine naturally.
Okay, so will the same thing be applied to K through 3? Because take, for example, my family. I have a first grader, a third grader, and a fifth grader. So does that mean we're not coming back from Christmas break until January 11th? Or just
I did not talk to the teaching and learning team about that, but I would assume yes. And Pete, you could just feel free to jump in. But I would assume that everyone would have that natural quarantine process.
Okay.
Yeah, the recommendation on January 11th was in conversation with the Department of Health. Their indication was that their expectation through Thanksgiving and Christmas that we would see a flattening or a potential increase in the rate of spread, not a downward trend. And so that natural break of an additional week was something that they recommended. If the board's expectation, as stated, was that we stay K3 until the governor or someone else tells us that we should close, then I would assume that we would bring them back on the 4th, K3.
I mean, it's totally operational, but I'm fine with if you're not bringing the fourth graders back until the 11th, and you needed that week of quarantining, using the holiday dates to make sense for our staff and for our students, I don't have an issue with. I just don't want K3 going back to an online learning model permanently or whatever. But if the Christmas break dates fluctuated and that's what needed to happen, I'm open to that.
So as a board, are we ready to accept the revised blended reopening start dates that would not apply to K3, but all of the rest? Is that what we're willing and ready to do, as opposed to approve a specific metric per 100,000? I'm just trying to get us to move forward with something.
I don't know that I'll ever be comfortable with okaying these dates, Jen, with them not being tied to some sort of case rate number. Again, it's a tough one. If our next motion is that we just, the January 11th date stays for PK46, and we say either the 11th or 25th, 7-8, and 25th for 9-12. And we've got 1,500 case rate numbers, hopefully not. Are we going to stick to those dates? I don't think we're going to do that. So I don't know. This is tough. Chris, would it help, or is it feasible to baby steps here, and I think our
I think
blue arrow
we have,
has been
I think
answered.
oh, go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
I was going to say, I know it's baby steps. The blue arrow, I think, has an answer on the revised. Should we get you a next step for the purple one, and so on and so forth, or because
Yeah,
I don't
think
know that.
response from the board on 4 through 6 and PK, and if that consideration is January the 11th, I think that would be a good next step. And then if the board wants to decide to revisit January, 7 through 8, 9 through 12, I think certainly the middle school and the high school principals, they're going to want to have a response. So they're going to need clarity so they can plan accordingly as well. So as long as we're revisiting 7 through 8 and 9 through 12 pretty quickly as a board, whatever that looks like, and if you want to make the decision about PK 4 through 6 right now, I think that's fine.
Okay, let me throw this at you, and I'm trying to, again, like Jen says, move forward here. Go ahead, Jen.
Sharon had something she wanted to say. Can we hear what Sharon was going to say before we have you
Absolutely.
propose?
Go ahead, Sharon.
I kind of lost my train of thought for a moment there right now. I'm still just not good with January 11th for the 4 through 6. I keep looking at a calendar trying to see if we couldn't bring them back just a little bit earlier. So they have that at least. I understand the numbers. We don't know how it's going to be. But from November 30th to January 11th is a very long time.
If I could interject, I think that comment speaks to the important need for metrics. It doesn't have to be January 11th. It could be November 30th if the rate comes down and we have some goalposts to work towards. So the conversation about, you could scratch all those dates from a teaching and learning perspective. They essentially don't exist if we don't have agreed upon metrics. If you're interested in having us come back earlier, you should just identify a date and tell us what that is, if you're not going to agree to a set of metrics that inform the decision.
So Pete, let me ask you on the metrics, because if we start to see our numbers go down, would the planning start to take place to get these kids back in? And then as soon as we hit that number, we put the kids in? Or would the planning start as soon as we hit that number and then it take another week or so to do the planning to get the kids in?
The planning is all done. I think Wahidas demonstrated that by their ability to pivot in just one day and move to a distance learning model. There are some cohorts at other sites that are having to do that. The work is done. There is an agreement between the district and the association about 5 days notice. And certainly we would want to work in partnership with the association about any transition to a less restrictive model. But those metrics give us ranges and goals to work towards. And certainly we would have several days notice if we say, hey, the numbers are going down, here's what we can predict. Then folks would be ready to transition immediately. And whether or not we agree on a hard number at 200, when it's around 300, when it's 275, then I think we have really serious conversations and say, hey, it's time to get back to work. It's time to be back on campus. But absent those metrics, which we asked from the jump at the initial meeting when the push from the board to reopen was presented, it's next to impossible operationally to make decisions and determinations without understanding what the metrics are. Because if the stance is that we should bring all K-3 students back regardless of the incident rate, I'm not sure why we would not apply that to across the system K-12. So to have a conversation about the metrics that doesn't inform the entire system is confusing for folks.
Okay, now I'm a little more comfortable with the metrics, how you explained it on that. Once you see the numbers starting to come down, then let's start to get busy. I still have, a problem setting that number at 200 right now before the kids actually go in. Mike, where do you, because I know you had a problem with the metrics. Where do you stand on that? Did you have a solid number or?
Ken, as much as I wish I wish there was a magic number. And, you know, Pete just said if they're around 275, I'm not even ready to put a number to that.
That's true.
I think we're forgetting that a lot of this, I mean, and we've given kudos to the Department of Health.
Mhm.
I think we're real close to them being the entity that says, plug this off and stop this. But I also have to agree with Pete's comment. I mean, if this metrics doesn't apply to K3, or if it doesn't apply K12, I think it's not fair that it only applies PK 412. I mean, this metric needs to be uniform across all grade levels. We have told them that K3 stays there indefinitely. I'm having, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Pete. I mean, if we don't agree on a metric, you guys are just going to continue on and bring everybody back? Is that fair to say?
I think operationally it becomes very difficult to make those kinds of determinations. We end up in this kind of setting where we're trying to discuss what's going to happen across the system because we don't have the guidelines to work from. Certainly Department of Health, CDC, OSPI, the state of Washington, states all across the country came out with guidance that at one point we decided to abandon. And we're in the predicament that we are now. So we're suggesting is going back to the guidance that was provided by the health experts to inform our decision-making, back to that theme of data rather than dates. And I think what's difficult about this conversation right now is you're talking about both. You're talking about data and dates. And unfortunately, in this instance, you can't have it both ways.
If you want to use data, then that would means that as numbers were starting to go lower, then you could reapproach the board saying, hey, the numbers are getting lower. Let's go to this stage and come and get board approval. I have no problem meeting as a board with this. These are very important decisions. This one tonight is very important. I've had a lot of communications from letters from very concerned people both ways tonight. And it's leaving us up to the 5 board members to decide what we're doing with all of our students in the district. And, you know, this ain't an easy decision, but I have no problem, again, saying that I have no problem with the district coming back and saying, hey, we're looking better. We can make this next move. And the board making the decision.
Personally, I would rather us come up with a metric that applies to everybody else. I'm comfortable with the 200 number. The other 3 of you, Ken's had his shared and I've shared mine. What are the other 3 of you at?
I mean, if we're doing that tomorrow, everybody goes to online learning. I mean, the decision we made K3 doesn't matter because if we have a 200 person threshold, our kindergartners aren't going back to school realistically until the middle of January at the earliest.
If that we could say K through 3 doesn't apply to the metric. I thought that we've already said that. So I'm sorry, when I share that I'm comfortable coming up with a metric that applies to everyone else except for K3, I didn't clearly define that, I guess. So I'm comfortable coming up with a metric for everyone else. And I hope we get there a lot sooner. But Lindsay, what do you think about that?
I hate it.
Okay.
I don't. This is such a difficult conversation. I mean, every part of me hates it. I hate it because at the end of the day, it feels like we're never gonna get there. And so it just feels like we're just keep moving the end goal. And so that for me is frustrating because I'm losing sight of the light at the end of this tunnel. when we put it to numbers, it goes from where our numbers were only high because of harvest, and then our numbers were only high because of Halloween, and then our numbers were only high because of Thanksgiving, and then Christmas, and then Martin Luther King, and then we'll have Valentine's Day where people go on dates and get together, and then we'll have, I mean, then you roll into spring break. It just, every time, this is why I personally have an issue with quarantining to an extent. As far as stay home for 2 weeks and then everything's going to be fine. And at the end of that 2 weeks, people move on with their lives. They start going out to dinner, they start going shopping, and then our numbers climb back up. They get together with their family. So until there is a legitimate vaccine or there is something to stop COVID numbers from rising, which so far we have found nothing that does that, besides staying in your homes and never leaving, which is unrealistic. This is going to be the Ferris wheel we keep going around. So I really struggle with saying once we're past this number, everybody goes to online, or 4 through 12 goes to online, because we'll be back at that number 2 weeks from now once we have Thanksgiving, and then 2 weeks after that. And it just feels like the end goal just, I can't see it. I can't see us getting back to 200 until May.
So are you comfortable with looking at dates or doing Ken's theory? When the numbers come down, then we re-meet?
I would prefer dates, and we do
Okay.
what's right in our community.
Okay, dates for you. Got it.
But I know,
Sharon?
recognize I'm one person. But
Sharon, are you comfortable with with dates being the determining factor, or those being the decision makers?
This is very hard. We're talking about a lot of different people and how they feel. The dates, I'm just concerned we keep putting these dates off, and if we come back with these dates and the numbers are higher, we'll be putting another date off. I understand the matrix. I just pulled it up on my other computer to look at it again. I'm probably more for a date. Because if it's going to go after that date, if it's going to go high anyway, we're going to be stopped.
Mike, where are you at?
I'm in a quandary. I don't want to be. I mean, why? Let's say we approve or we okay January 11th and 25th for 4 through 12. And then, like Sharon just said, I mean, if the numbers aren't what they need to be, those numbers or those start dates are irrelevant. So if we're not going to agree to a metric number, I think instituting dates is not the way to go. I think this conversation, we need to give, I mean, we can't expect the district on a dime either, guys. We need to, this isn't something, it's not a switch. All the great work that's been done and all the effort that's been put in by our folks, they're to be commended for it. And I feel for them in the fact that we keep throwing these curveballs, not intentionally, not because we want to. I mean, we're being forced to do some of these things. And I think we need to be very firm, I guess, with what we're going to decide here, whether it's the dates or a metric. I would like to hear from Chris, from Pete, those at the district. Is there any leeway in the 200 number as a metric?
No, I think that recommendation was actually part of the documentation that we received from Department of Health. So the 200 is the metric, Mike. That's why it was our recommendation.
I think that that would bring us. Anybody want to motion that the metric be accepted as presented, where anything over 200 would be all online?
I have to unmute. I move that we approve 200 as the metric that applies to pre-K and 4 through 12th grades returning to campus.
Okay, there's been a motion made that 200 cases per 100,000 be the metric utilized for PK through PK 4 through 12 as returning to campus. Is that correct, Jen?
Yes.
I second that motion. So there's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay.
Sharon, I didn't hear your vote, Sharon.
I know I haven't given it yet.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault. This is very hard. I would like to, I just want to see those K through 4 go in a little earlier. I'm going to say nay.
Okay. Motion does not pass, 2-3. Okay, so with those things out of the way, unless somebody's got something else to interject, I think those dates that are on the presentation are start dates for those classes.
The accelerated or the revised, Mike?
The revised.
I would like to find out from Pete and maybe Chris if there was a possibility of having pre-K through 6 start all on January 4th or all on January 11th instead of splitting that up. I would prefer January 4th because that would get our pre-K kids in sooner. Is that even an option to start them at the same time after the first of the year?
Yeah, it's certainly an option for us to consider. Again, that recommendation was based on a conversation for the Department of Health. I think they're trying to look around the corner and predict what's coming our way. So we trusted their judgment and said we can accept the 11th as part of our recommendation, but it could be adjusted to the 4th if that was the directive we were given.
Okay, I will make a motion that we accept our pre-K and 4 through 12 to move forward with the revised blended opening start dates, with the exception of if we can start on January 4th with K through 3, pre-K and 4 through 6. I would prefer to do that. If not, if that doesn't work, January 11th is fine. That was a long motion. I apologize. But my motion is to accept the dates for the revised blending reopening for pre-K 4 through 12.
Okay, so your motion isn't to make pre-K 4-6 January 4th?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry.
Okay, so there's been a motion that PK 4 through 6.
Wait. Lindsay, can you please start over? I'm sorry. Please
I would
start
like
again.
to make a motion that pre-K 4 through 6 starts January 4th, and that we accept the recommendations for 7-8 starting on January 11th or January 25th, and 9 through 12 starting January 25th at the semester break.
Okay, there's been a motion to make PK 4th through 6th start date January 4th, 7th and 8th, January 11th or the 25th, and 9 through 12th, January 25th. Is there a second to that motion?
I will second that motion.
Okay, there's been a motion made. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-2. Chris, the directive is, if I've written stuff down correctly, K3 will remain on campus indefinitely unless there is a, I'll call it a gubernatorial entity, OSPI, Department of Health, governor that closes down K-12. PK 4 through 6, start date of January 4th, 7 and 8, a January 11th or 25th, and 9-12, January 25th. Is that clear?
We have it all, Mike.
I think that is pending when preschool can actually get onto campus. I mean, if it's not available January 4th, that part is beyond anyone's control.
Yeah, and I think that we would have ample time before then to know if that can be done or not. Okay, again, I just want to thank everyone. These are tough decisions. We've been charged with very, very important decisions tonight. So I want to commend all of us that, give our 2 cents worth. I appreciate the fact that we're all in it for the right reasons. We may vary in our opinions, but at the end of the day, we're a unit. Thank you all once again. Chris, your entire staff, the entire team, every administrator, every employee at the district, thank you very much for what you do, what you're doing, and what you'll continue to do. I have no doubt that we'll get through this, and we're going to do what's best to the best of our abilities, and we will take on these challenges as they come. Thank you all once again very much for everything that you do. Ken, I see you're unmuted. I don't know if you have something else to add.
Well, I was just, you started before me. I was just going to echo those same words. I know there's been a lot of time put in by the staff to come up with this information for tonight. There's been a lot of time and effort put in by all the teachers in the schools now. I know they're working hard to try to keep our kids safe and keep them in schools right now. There's so much appreciation, and not just from me, from all the parents out there too. But I do have to reiterate that, this is a community effort, and a lot of our spread's community spread. And we want to keep our kids in school. And I just got to remind the public out there, please be safe. We're trying to keep our kids in school. We're doing what you asked us to in the beginning. And it's getting hard and getting difficult. We knew these times were going to come up when we made this decision a couple months ago. And I just ask you, please be safe. And we're thinking of the kids. We want you to think of the kids too. We're trying to keep them in school. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Our special board meeting is now adjourned. Good night.